Attention, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. I'm Bob Shankman, and I'm the historian of the Newton, New Jersey Rotary Club. My topic today is A History of Women in Rotary. Note, this is a 15-minute presentation, generic version, intended for Rotary Club meetings. Customized versions are advised. They usually include addendum noting the early women members and the current status of women in the individual club. Please feel free to use this information as a basis for your presentation in total or in part. Before I start, you'll know that I'm wearing my Rotary pin, so I'm going to ask all of you now to take a few seconds and look around your table and see who's also wearing a Rotary pin. But as you look around the table and room today, or at any Rotary meeting, you probably don't see anything unusual. However, it wasn't always like this. Having women in the audience is relatively new. About 8 years ago, the author of this essay was seated next to Laura Camp at his local club in Newton. Laura mentioned that she was the first woman allowed in the club, and he said, "What?" At that time, Newton Rotary had been incorporated about 87 years. When he learned that women for many years were barred, he began to research the topic. Since that time, this presentation has been made more than 25 times at clubs in northern New Jersey. The author was intrigued by the fact that women are such a new addition to this 113-plus-year-old organization. He learned that there have been several very early attempts to include them. The first official attempt was at the Rotary International Convention in 1910. Some delegates introduced discussion to allow women, but it was overwhelmingly rejected. The Los Angeles Herald, August 18, 1910, had this to say about the decision. Because the average man cannot manage the average woman, the members of the Rotary Clubs of America barred women from their organization. It's interesting to note, however, that the first constitution for Club Number 1, the Chicago Club, adopted in January 1906, makes no mention of gender. It refers only to persons, but apparently it was implied to mean men. Efforts to join internationally also began early. In 1912, a club in Belfast, Ireland, discussed the advisability of women joining in or attending weekly luncheons. However, it was rejected. The 1921 International Convention in Scotland produced the Standard Club Constitution. In it, the terminology was changed to state, "A Rotary Club shall be comprised of men." But it also permitted, at that time, the formation of a separate ladies' auxiliary. I guess they were using their own version of separate but equal. Several subsequent international conventions, specifically in 1950, India, and 1964, Sri Lanka, considered deleting the word male from the Constitution, but again, they were withdrawn or defeated. There were other movements over the years, but they did not gain any momentum. The Upper Manhattan Club in 1972, for example, proposed to admit women, but it was rejected with laughter. Several other efforts were heard during the late 60s and early 70s. This was coincidental with the rise of the women's movement and the fact that women were reaching higher levels in their professions. In 1976, Duarte, California, had a very small Rotary Club. Duarte is a town about 12 miles east of Pasadena on Route 66. Currently, there are about 21,000 residents. Since the club had only 8 members then, they voted to invite 3 women into the club. 2 of them, both school principals, joined immediately. The third joined a few months later. They wanted to grow the club, and this move dramatically grew it. Initially, the new members were listed using only their first initials. However, a few months later, in celebration of the club's 25th anniversary, they were reintroduced using their full, complete names. As you might expect, word spread, and a few months later, February 1978, their charter was revoked by Rotary International. After refusing to remove the members, this club changed their name to the ex-Rotary Club of Duarte and existed without a charter. This began a series of legal actions. The club initially filed suit protesting the revocation of the charter. In 1983, the California Superior Court ruled in favor of RI and upheld gender-based discrimination. But the California Court of Appeal later reversed the decision that same year. The court ruled that the Duarte Rotary Club was, in fact, a business establishment and that it came under the auspices of the Unruh Civil Rights Act, which outlaws business discrimination in California. RI appealed this decision to the California Supreme Court. The court, however, refused to hear the case. It was then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. It seems RI was very intent on keeping the women out. The U.S. Supreme Court made their decision on May 4, 1987. It ruled that Rotary clubs may not exclude women from membership on the basis of their gender. It generally upheld the decision of the California Court of Appeal. This was a 7-0 decision. 2 judges recused themselves. Harry Blackmun was an honorary Rotarian, and Sandra Day O'Connor's spouse was a Rotarian. The New Jersey Herald featured a front-page story under the heading, Women Allowed in Rotary, on 5/5/87. In it, Justice Powell said that the California Public Accommodations Law applies to Rotary clubs because they are sizable, have a high turnover rate, engage in public activities, encourage participation by non-members, and welcome news media coverage of their central activities. Quote, the court rejected Rotary's argument that it has a constitutional right to bar the admission of women as members of any affiliated club because of its selective membership policy, public service activities, and other attributes, stated the New York Times, May 5/87. The Associated Press noted on May 6, 1987, that the court's ruling turned on the notion that Rotary clubs often are important forums for developing business contacts. Rotary, U.S., reacted fast and accepted the decision. A policy statement was issued stating that any U.S. club could now admit qualified women as members. The Duarte California Club, now reinstated, initiated its first women in early June 1987. The club is still in existence and meets Wednesday mornings at 7:45 at Denny's. While there was widespread media publicity after the court decision, there was no direct communication from Rotary International. The Duarte Club eventually received an invoice asking it to list its members as of June 30, 1987, and to pay international dues based on the membership. The club listed all members, including the women. To this day, that invoice remains the only communication from RI regarding the end of the Duarte chapter revocation and its subsequent reinstatement. Women continue to play a key role in the spirit of the club, and they are now known as the Mouse That Roared, the Rotary Club of Duarte. Sylvia Whitlock, one of the early members, became the first woman Rotary Club president after the court ruling. She went on to become governor of District 5300, California and Nevada, on July 1, 2012. Recently, in a speech before a California Rotary Club, she noted that the first 2 Duarte women received little initial resistance from the club itself. The only resistance they had within the town came from other women. They objected because the club then met in the evening with many married men in attendance. In 1989, at its first meeting after the Supreme Court ruling, the International Council of Legislation voted to eliminate the men-only requirement. This meeting was held in Singapore. This presentation was made to the Cedar Grove, New Jersey Club a few years ago. There it was learned that one of their members, Bob Pidio, PDG 1983-84, was in attendance, where he recorded his vote to admit women. He mentioned that there was an extremely active debate on both sides of the issue. The final vote was 328, 75% for a change, and 117 against. Prior to this change, although not allowed as members, women, especially wives, were enthusiastically welcome at meetings. In fact, they were known as Rotary Anns. This tradition began in 1914. The National Convention was being held in Houston, and several members rode on a train that started in San Francisco. Two women named Anne were traveling with their husbands and affectionately became known as Rotary Ann. The name stuck and soon applied to women who attended the meetings or functions. In Newton, the first women were admitted in 1988. They were Laura Camp in June 1988 and Pam Lazaro a few months later. Both women are still members. When were the first women members inducted into your club? The court decision continued to be a major news event throughout the country. The Bergen Record, May 5, 1987, noted the Supreme Court decision with a major story. It mentioned that the Maywood Rotary Club had attempted to admit two businesswomen for the past 5 years. However, they were blocked by RI. The New Jersey Herald later reported on May 10, 1987, that the two women were admitted and the chapter was among the first to act after the decision. The Bergen Record also reported that the decision would open the doors to women, not only in Rotary, but other male-only clubs such as Kiwanis. In fact, Kiwanis changed the Constitution in 1988 as well. Women currently make up 26% of their membership. Rotary clubs were now attracting high-caliber business members, regardless of gender, throughout the country and the world. The court decision was an instrumental and important civil rights decision. But there's always room for improvement. While there are now 200,000 women members, this is only 18% of the approximately 1.2 million total members. Specifically, it is 15% internationally and 22% in the U.S. While there is still much resistance in many Asian districts, Japan, for example, has only 4% women members. In 2001, 52% of clubs had women members. This increased to 78% in 2012, but that means 22% of the clubs do not have any women members, or at least didn't have it in 2012. To review, the original Constitution made no mention of gender, but it was implied to mean men only. International efforts to include women began as early as 1912. The Constitution was changed in 1921 to explicitly restrict membership to men. The Duarte, California Club inducted two women in 1977. RI revoked their charter in 1978. A 10-year legal battle ensued, resulting in the U.S. Supreme Court stating that women cannot be excluded. RI reacted fast and changed the Constitution. The decision was a major news event and important civil rights advance. May 4th, 2018 is the 31st anniversary of the court decision. Thank you for your attention.